It's the spookiest season of all, so it's only fitting to make a spookier sculpture. I'll start with a simple wire armature and cover that with a lot of foil to build up his lower body that is all covered up with a cloth. I'll also go over the foil with a thin wire to make it more sturdy and keep it together nicely. To make the clay stick to the foil, I'll add Sculpey Bacon Bond, and then I can start adding the clay for the base shape. The bottom part gets some strips of clay that I will smooth into the rest of the clay to make it look like folds in the fabric. Once I'm happy with his little skirt, I can start working on his upper body. I'll start with building up his chest and then adding some core muscles as well. I read that the art director of Silent Hill doesn't like the character being very muscular, but I think it looks pretty nice. He's also dragging a gigantic sword around all day, which must be a nice workout. So I'll use my artistic liberty here and make him pretty muscular. Of course, that means he also needs a muscular back. And his arms will be the most ripped since they are the ones carrying all the weight. Of course, his skin is looking a bit too perfect right now, so I will mess him up a bit later. But before that, I have to add his hands as well. And after a bit of moving some clay around, the hands don't look as hideous anymore. I'll add some visible veins that get smoothed into the skin and a few cuts and scars fitting a killer. Then I'll go over it with isopropyl alcohol and give it a first bake. Then I can start working on his pyramid head without ruining everything else. After getting the base shape done, I'll add a few details around the edges. And some bolts, gears, screws, and other little details. Then he goes into the oven for another bake, and he is ready to be painted. I'll start with a very pale and dull skin tone. Usually I would finish painting one section and then move on to the next, but the skin needs multiple layers, so while it's drying, I'll add the base colors for everything else. A dark brown for the head, and a light beige for the fabric. Returning to his skin, I'll go over the veins and scars with a light purplish color to help them stand out a bit more. Using a sponge, I'll go over his skin with a dark color to dirty him up a bit. Then I'll do it again with a red color and later add even more red with a brush to make it look like bloodstains. His skirt is dragging on the ground and soaking up all the dirt and blood, so I will add gradually darker colors to make it look very dirty and worn. This also gets the occasional bloodstain on it. For the head, I'll go over the edges with a lighter highlight. And then an even lighter one to make it look like scraped metal. I'll then add a few different orange tones to make it look rusty. This also gets a bit of blood on it, but not a lot since I don't want the whole paint job to be just blood. To make his sword, I'm using epoxy sculpt for the base. I'll roll out a piece and add it to a little cardboard drawing I made. Epoxy sculpt is very sturdy, so this helps make sure that the sword doesn't break. After it has dried, I'll add a layer of clay on top to shape the blade. And add a few details, but the design is very simple. I made the handle a bit too thick here, so I ended up remaking it later. After baking, I'll sand the edges to make them a bit sharper and blade-like. And since this sword is very heavy, it has gotten some damage from all the battles it's been through, so I will add some cuts and scrapes into it. Then I'll paint it in a slightly different gray color and then go over it with some shiny silver effect paints. The handle gets a gunmetal color and some beige for the handle straps. I'll also add a bunch of dirt and grime to the sword before adding a lot of dried and fresh blood on it. Lastly, I'll cover it with a black wash. To make the base, I'm using a Foamcore board. First, I'll decide the placement of pyramid head and then cut into the foam, but not all the way. Then I can go over the cuts with a metal tool to shape the rocks. Using some crumpled up foil, I'll go over the whole thing to add some texture. I also cut out a few smaller foam pieces for the walls. I'll shape them a bit and also go over them with foil so they look more like rocks. These will get glued to the base with a glue meant specifically for foam, but you can also use hot glue. This glue works just like contact cement, where you put it on both surfaces, let it dry, and then add them together. I'm painting the base with a dark gray mixed with some Mod Podge. Then dry brushing it with a lighter gray. And then an even lighter tone. And you can see me panic here because the brush had way more on it than I bargained for. Then I'll add a black wash over everything. It's looking a bit too clean at this point, so I'll also add a brown wash on top. Using some rolled out clay bits, I'll make a few chains that I can then add to the walls of the base. I also added some smaller pieces on the floor and a few broken chain bits. It would be a bit weird to have very clean chains in this environment, so I will go over them with some orange tones as well to make them look rusty. Lastly, I will add some blood to the base and chains. Then it's time to add pyramid head to the base, and that's it. Thank you to all these lovely people over on Patreon for supporting the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!